take it. Oh no, don't know about that, but thank you. And oh, it's just such a pleasure to be with you. Welcome. It's so fun to have Arizona, my home state. I'm coming from Scottsdale, Arizona, and to have California, Hawaii, New Mexico. But I do need to thank Claire. I mean, how wonderful was that on a midday break? I kept saying, I just wish I had a Claire bobblehead right in my nightstand because her voice and her presence was perfect for a segue in today's presentation. So I want to just take all of you on a journey, and we think about the last 12 months. We think about this COVID-19 phenomenon and this pandemic and everything that it has presented to us. I mean, for some people, it has been a welcomed bonus. It has been a time to spend with family, with friends, to kind of redefine what they want for the future. It's created personal balance, so it's been a great thing, but for many, it's been so hard. I mean, they've had, of course, personal financial loss. They've lost their job. They've had personal social isolation. They either have had some compromised health concerns themselves, or certainly have known other people with health concerns. So it's just been a very tumultuous time. And so for this moment, while I have you for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to talk about how we can just re-identify with the term suffering. We know that pain is inevitable. It happens to everybody, but we want to make sure that by the end of my time with you today, that we adopt the mindset that suffering is optional. Again, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. We know that betrayal hurts. We know that loss hurts. We know that uncertainty hurts, but there's a way that we can identify with this process to, in the end, come out ahead. So stay with me. I know it sounds like a tall order, but stay with me. So, as we look for ways that we can take these challenging opportunities and end up in a growth promoting mindset, I want you to think about for just a moment. Think about if you're experiencing a hardship right now, whether it's in your own personal practice, whether it's in kind of defining what your future looks like, whether you've lost the job, or whatever situation here and now that you're burdened with. And if you feel that, you've been kind of unscathed in this process and you don't really have a current situation that you're struggling with, think back to a time that you had something that was heavy on your heart, because I'm going to refer to that time as we kind of walk through this journey together. So as we realize that it's not despite our difficulties that we survive, it's because our difficulties that we thrive. So let's get busy. I want you to take that scenario that you just identified, and I want you to ask yourself one important question. Did I or do I recognize that there are bonuses behind my burden? So I want to talk about 4 bonuses today that we can identify behind our burden. Now, you all have your burden, whether it's here and now or whether it's in the past. Okay, so have we recognized the bonuses behind the burden? I'm going to talk about bonus number 1. Bonus number 1 I like to call there is no strength or there is no struggle. So as we think about this challenge that we're, as I said, either identified with now or in the past, ask yourself, was this challenge to me or for me? And I'm going to give you some pretty tough kind of self-auditing questions that you can ask yourself. We obviously can't choose all the time what happens to us, right? There's a lot of things out of our control, a lot of variables, case in point, the last 12 weeks, that have happened to us, that we have no control of the events, and sometimes we have no control of the outcome. But what we do have control over is our reaction, our response to that. So let's talk about this. So as we talk about first, is this happening to me, right? You think about more of the victim mentality or the woe is me mentality. Let's ask some pretty tough questions. And again, I get these questions from my own life, right? I get these questions from experiences that I've had in the past. And these are things that I'm like, you know what? In hindsight, I was kind of taking the road of the victim, asking these questions. So I'm going to share some with you, and you can kind of maybe jot some down and think of this as how you might identify with some of your burdens or challenges. Number 1, am I looking for areas to place blame or criticize? Very common, very natural. Think about it. Am I seeking unhealthy control of another person or boundaries in general? So that control tight control over outcome often isn't really a reality, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but just think about that. Am I blaming myself excessively? Do I carry a lot of self-blame? Self-auditing and learning is healthy, which we'll also talk about, but living in that space of self-blame or self-criticism is just counterproductive. Am I finding enemies to conquer or enemies to stronghold? Now, I know a lot of people, they kind of verbally want to stronghold other people to make themselves feel or act superior. It's just something to think about. Am I recycling drama? Well, we all know drama, right? Drama's in the workplace, in our personal life. It seems like we can't escape drama. But are we recycling it? Are we giving a life that it really doesn't really necessarily need to have or shouldn't have? Just a thought. Am I gripped by fear and insecurity? And what I mean by that, am I making decisions based on limiting beliefs? I'm not smart enough. I'm not strong enough. I'm not educated enough. Am I beautiful enough? Am I capable enough? So those are questions to think. Am I acting out of fear and insecurity? We're going to talk a little bit about that as we proceed today and talk about where that might be coming from. Am I wearing kind of like a cloak of burden, meaning I've had these hard things happen to me? Am I kind of wearing that? Is that my mantle, right? Is that my story? Am I getting mileage out of that? Again, these are just questions that I throw out there because I, remember times in my life that I'm like, you know what? I think I'm getting more mileage out of that than I really should. I think I need to let that story go. So just food for thought. And the last question in the category of, is this happening to me, is, am I living in another person's business? Now, this is a biggie because it's often very, very secret. So if you say to yourself, am I upset because of someone else's opinion, someone else's behavior, someone else's judgment, someone else's gossip, something that's outside of me, right? Or the weather, or when am I gonna die, or earthquakes, or storms, etc. That's a higher powers business. So in other words, it's not my business. My business is my actions, my reactions, my amends, my chip on my shoulder, right? The things that I take ownership of. When I stay 100% in my business, that allows me to be 100% accountable and responsible. And the consequences often then I can take responsibility for as well. So again, there's some real gray areas and some real fine lines, but it can cause some room to pause as we self-audit our way with these burdens that we're either currently experiencing or in the past, or certainly they're going to come around again. So you'll have your burdens to kind of like reevaluate this in the future. And if you want any of this information, certainly as a handout or as a download, we can provide that for you as well. All right, so remember, back to this is happening to me, is I've known people, and I'm sure all of you have too, that you've seen them, it's almost like they just thrive on the drama, right? It's almost like it's a thirst that's never quenched. It's like a hamster on a wheel, right? They're chasing the drama, and it's never going to stop. They're never going to find the peace. And so keep in mind, it's just a perpetual, never-ending negative energy. So again, these situations are happening to me, right? The victimhood. But I want to give you a different approach now. Now I want to give you an approach of looking at it as a teachable moment, right? A moment where I can say, you know what? What's the mature mindset? What's the humble mindset? How can I learn from this experience? Oftentimes, heavy burdens and challenges are completely out of our control, and they weren't anything that we instigated. They happen to us, right? So it's one important variable to say, what is this here to teach me? Why is this happening for me? So a couple questions I'll ask. So again, what is this challenge here to teach me? What am I here to learn? All right, let's look at it from a place of abundance. Am I accepting the fact that what I resist will persist? Meaning, if I argue with reality, if I argue with it is what it is, well, guess what? I'm gonna lose. And trust me, I'm an expert of arguing with reality, right? If I talk my way out of it, if I fuss my way out of it, it'll change. Well, guess what? Reality doesn't change. It is what it is. And so when I realized, stop arguing with it, it's gonna trump, Kendra, what you're trying to do. so accept it. And that's a very important mindset. Also, ask yourself, am I seeking the approval and validation of other people? Am I kind of allowing my ego to take over in the situation? Or is my ego getting bruised in the situation? And that's a very, very important point that I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about ego. Ego is a very, it's a very global term, right? It's a term that has many different impressions and many different definitions, but it's very, very important when we talk about suffering, and let me explain why. Ego is a characteristic that, of course, we all have in common, right? It's something that, as I mentioned, psychologists have a different definition, just basic common knowledge have a different definition. We all kind of throw it out there that that's just a man of great ego, or he's got a big head, or he's arrogant, etc. But I'll talk about this very complex term and simplify it and talk about and share with you how I see it relating to suffering. So what is ego? I'm going to talk about what is ego. I'm going to talk about some of the masks that ego wears, and I'm also going to talk about how to manage it because it is very important. So when we think about thoughts and emotional patterns that are repeated because of a connection or because of an attachment to something that we expect or to something that we label ourselves as. In other words, the ego consists of positive or negative attachments and stories or labels that we identify with, that we claim as our own. Have you ever heard somebody say, well, it's just who I am, I can't change it, right? So again, that's what ego is. We all have attachments. Nobody's free from them. Possessions, opinions, attitudes, addictions, my right, my wrong, am I stylish, am I frumpy, am I a mother, am I a wife, am I a blousy cook, am I a good tennis player, right? I mean, it goes on and on and on. You get my point. We all kind of like make a claim on something that helps identify who we are. So how does this impact us and how does it relate to suffering? Well, the ego wants to make us think that all of these identifications are for our benefit, but you know what? That's not true. Actually, these identifications and these attachments to these labels actually, in a sense, enslave us. They characterize us, and when we become so identified by them, we lose our creativity, we lose our freedom. Actually, our self-esteem is affected. It really can chisel away at our own self-love. And so it's important, although ego isn't a bad thing, it's just so important to see it for what it is. And if we give it the power and allow it to tighten its grip over what we're attaching to, then that's where we find that we're suffering. And that's where we find that we're kind of aching. And so remember, the ego only cares about keeping a job. That's all it cares about. And oftentimes we keep giving it a job, right? We keep giving it the power. So as I mentioned, make no mistake about it, the ego's not bad, but it's just about managing it. So here's a case in point. If you're a parent, right? Of course, I'm a mother of 4 children. They're adults. I have almost 4 grandbabies, and so I can relate to this. We're a parent. I'm a parent. I'm a mother. My child, right? I want to make sure I protect my child. I want to make sure I'm identified in a healthy way as being a mother. That's a good thing, right? That's an honorable thing. But it can quickly turn into something that is not healthy, that is a little more pathologic. When I say, my 4-year-old Johnny, I know that my dear friend Molly has a child named Johnny, but he's perfect. So my little 4-year-old Johnny hit a little boy in preschool. Oh my gosh, now I'm gonna just lose it because I taught Johnny better. And that actually reflects on my parenting. Other people are gonna think that I'm a bad parent. So what am I gonna do? Shame on Johnny. I'm gonna be more angry than I should be. I'm gonna shame him and blame him. Because why? My ego's threatened. I feel like, ooh, that doesn't feel good to me. Versus, you know what? This is a teaching opportunity because guess what? Most 4-year-old boys do those types of things, right? And so then it gives me a chance to then teach Johnny the natural and logical consequences to his behavior versus acting out and reacting out of a place of fear based on my bruised ego. So that's just a suggestion, and I think that's very helpful. At least it has been helpful in my journey with mothering. Now, of course, my 4 adult children, I don't mother anymore, but it did help so much when they were younger. I'd like to talk about a few masks that the ego wears because it's very subtle. And oftentimes, I know like me, I have to often catch myself and go, oh my gosh, that is so the ego. So mask number 1, the ego loves to identify with opinions, right? Especially now, things are so polarized. And the ego loves to create arguments. It loves to defend its position. So kind of watch that. I know I have to watch that a lot. So especially in relationships, when we kind of jockey for position and get in our corner and say, that's just who I am, deal with it. That's something to think about. So ego loves opinions. Ego also loves to wear a mask and kind of hide under the thought category, right? So those are just my thoughts. That's who I own and that's who I am. Well, you know what? The ego likes to wear some guises as well, kind of like the masks, but even deeper when we're talking about thoughts. So when you think about I feel superior than other people, or conversely, I feel inferior, right? So that again is kind of like, you want to say it's a feeling, and that's honorable and healthy, but it's when you attach to that and claim it as who you are. Being anxious, of course, very common, but ask yourself, what is it I'm really attaching it to? Am I attaching to the thoughts that I'm telling myself? Am I attaching to the stories from the past? Am I attaching to anxiety that something might be happening in the future? Because the ego loves the past and it loves the future, right? It doesn't like the present moment as much. It loves the past. It loves to say, you know what? Let's bring up the past and let's bring up the pain and let's cling to that. And then let's act accordingly. Why? Because ego loves a job. So when we go back in the past, something that's already happened, we're like, oh, that happened to me. And it's invoking this really uncomfortable feeling. And oh my gosh, therefore I'm gonna kind of grip really strongly instead of going, okay, you know what? Okay, that's the ego. Instead of doing what Claire would do, right? Stretch and breathe. So again, it's just one of those tools. Same thing with the future. I'm really nervous for this exam, or I can't, I'm so scared this is gonna happen. Well, it hasn't happened yet. Stay in the present moment. So another very key variable. And another mask that the ego loves to wear is identifying with status or possessions, which is huge given the fact that we're in this COVID situation with so many losses occurring, loss of job, loss of financial stability, loss of social status. Some people, are going through divorces, loss of marital status. So again, when we attach ourselves to possessions and they're taken away from us, oftentimes people go, wow, well, what am I without my brand new car? What am I without being the CEO? They have to kind of recalibrate their lives, which in the end isn't a bad thing. It's a healthy thing. But it gives us kind of a way to kind of recalibrate and audit. Wow, this is really good for me to look at. So again, oftentimes it's not so much what we're doing, but it's when something is removed from us that helps remind us wow, you know what? That was really attached to that. And the interesting thing is there's nothing like suffering that will teach us where our ego lies. That's a very important concept. So let's talk about managing the ego. It's so easier said than done, right? To have this self-awareness and this self-audit and to look at the ego and kind of say, okay, you know what? You're not a bad thing, you're a good thing, but let's put it in check. And that's why I love what Claire did today, because as we ask ourselves, am I attaching my validity? Am I attaching my self-worth to another person's opinion? Am I attaching my self-worth to what I own or don't own? Am I attaching my self-worth or an expectation that may or may not happen? And if in fact that expectation doesn't come to pass, am I shattered? Because life does get messy. And so we ask ourselves those questions, we can be real with ourselves and be very intimate with ourselves. And that's what I love, again, what Claire did, is because it brings us back to the breath. And I love how she said, sip of air. It brings us back to the breath, and it brings us back to being mindful to the here and now. And as we manage our ego through mindfulness, through meditation, through breathing, what it does is it kind of calls the ego out. It says, you know what, I see you for what it's worth. It's good, you can do that, but I'm not going to react accordingly. So again, it's a beautiful concept. So enough of the ego, but I think it was valuable to bring that concept in when it comes to suffering. So to recap with bonus number one. Bonus number one basically is the pain you feel today will be the strength that you have tomorrow. Promise. Because tough times don't last, but tough people do. All right, let's talk about bonus number two. The bonus behind the burden is that we understand ourselves better. And as I mentioned before, character doesn't necessarily create or build character. Pain rather. Pain doesn't necessarily create or build character, but what it does is it reveals it. So think about, how can I actually create and build character through pain? Well, I can do that by being aware, by having a sense of my vulnerabilities, by being intimate with who I am, by looking at myself with my lenses nice and clean and going, you know what, I am willing to audit myself. And it's interesting because, we do all that we can, at least I do, to avoid pain. This is just a kind of a natural knee-jerk reaction. And so I love this. I read it a while ago, and I love the 4 M's of running away from pain. There was the MasterCard, to detach from suffering. The M for MasterCard. There's the M for a muffin, to eat our way out of suffering. There's the M to the martini, to drink ourselves away from the suffering. And the last one was an M for men, right? Or women, to, act our way in some way out of suffering. So, these are natural human tendencies to try to run away. But as we stay present with it, and as we increase our awareness of actually where it's coming from, we then can start acting from a place of clarity and confidence and vision, which is so exciting. All right, bonus number 3. Pain does allow us to demonstrate self-love. And I don't know about you, but life gets so busy, and sometimes I put myself down low on the totem pole and kind of forget to take care of myself. But in the past, when I've gone through some really heart-wrenching times, I think to myself, wow, I really need a hug. Physically, I've actually given myself a hug and say, I love you, Kendra, we're gonna get through this.